Have you ever stopped to wonder how a legendary civilization, feared for its unbeatable army and revered for its absolute discipline, could simply crumble in the face of a rising power? What happens when an empire built on blood, sweat, and Spartan honor sees its supremacy threatened by a force no one expected? Rome. If you're a history buff and have ever wondered how Sparta, a symbol of strength and courage in antiquity, lost its crown to a new giant, then stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. Today we'll delve together into the fascinating clash between Rome and Sparta, revealing details and hidden strategies that change the fate not only of these cities, but of the entire ancient world. Imagine the Mediterranean landscapes as the stage for epic battles, alliances forged behind the scenes, and decisions capable of redefining borders and turning legends into dust. The rivalry between Rome and Sparta was not just a dispute over territory, but a true war of mentalities, leadership styles, and worldviews. While Sparta was known for its relentless soldiers, the rigor of its military training, and the legend of the 300 warriors who defied even the gods, Rome emerged with an innovative strategy, a flexible political structure, and an uncanny ability to turn enemies into allies. But is brute force alone enough to sustain an empire? Or does the secret to true domination lie in knowing when to use diplomacy, when to negotiate, and when to simply wait for the right moment to act? Over the centuries, Sparta built its reputation on fear and respect. Its name echoed among the city-states of Greece as a synonym for invincibility. However, the world was changing. And while many still looked to Spartan battlefields as a guarantee of security, Rome was already quietly infiltrating its rivals, gaining influence, forging agreements, and closely observing the enemy's every move. History shows us that often the fall of a power doesn't happen overnight. Sparta's decline was a slow process, almost invisible to contemporaries, but inevitable for those who understand how power dynamics work. Rome not only witnessed this weakening, but also knew how to seize every opportunity. And it's precisely at this point in the narrative that things start to get interesting. Behind the facade of battles, gleaming armor, and military marches, what was truly at stake was control of the future of Greece, and later, the entire world. It's impossible not to be drawn into this historic turning point, where ancient traditions are challenged, innovative strategies change the course of events, and previously invincible figures discover that all glory can be fleeting. If you've ever experienced moments when everything seemed under control, but a new force emerged and turned the tide, you'll identify with Sparta's trajectory in the face of the Roman advance. What you're about to witness is a succession of choices, mistakes, and successes that paved the way for Rome's rise and the oblivion of the Spartan legend. Now get ready to see the behind the scenes of this epic rivalry in a whole new light, because the truth about how Rome defeated Sparta and changed history forever may be very different than you imagine. And if at any point along this journey you felt like everything could change in a single instant, you'll realize how much this duel between Rome and Sparta isn't just a dispute from the past, but a reflection of the great upheavals in our own lives. As Sparta's supremacy begins to be questioned and the Romans' strategic intelligence redraws the map of power, perhaps you'll see parallels with the challenges, falls, and new beginnings you've experienced or witnessed. So I'd really like to know, what has surprised you most or made you reflect so far? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with your thoughts on strength, strategy, or destiny. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. So if you're enjoying this journey through time, don't forget to like it now. It really helps us continue bringing you deep, meaningful stories like this one. And if you want to be part of this community, following each new discovery of the Roman universe and the legends of the past, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. When you comment, like, and subscribe, it's not just another number. It's a sign that this message is reaching you and inspiring new ideas, new connections, and perhaps even a new way of looking at history. And speaking of seeing beyond, let's continue together because the journey of Rome and Sparta is just beginning. Over the centuries, the name Sparta has been much more than a simple geographical reference. For all the peoples of the ancient world, it was synonymous with strength, discipline, and a legend that transcended borders. Imagine living in a time when the mere mention of the word Spartan was enough to silence arguments, intimidate adversaries, and inspire respect even in the most powerful rivals. Sparta was not just a city, it was a veritable war machine, carefully crafted to survive and triumph amid any adversity. From an early age, every citizen of Sparta was encouraged to view life as a battlefield. The collective mentality was almost religiously intense. Training began in childhood, when boys were taken from their families to enter the rigorous military education system known as the agoge. At each stage, young men were challenged not only to overcome physical limits, but also to develop emotional resilience, self-control, and courage in the face of danger. It was not uncommon for them to be subjected to trials that demanded personal sacrifice, overcoming pain, and even the detachment of their individuality for the good of the polis. The impact of this training was overwhelming. To outsiders, the Spartans seemed nearly invincible, capable of facing much larger armies, enduring extreme hardships, and maintaining a unique cohesion in combat. And all of this was not the result of chance, but rather of historical construction, where every detail was carefully considered to ensure supremacy on the battlefield. Discipline was the central pillar of this journey. Sparta was famous for its strict laws, imposed by the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, which dictated everything from diet to the use of words, as the Spartans valued silence and strategic thinking more than eloquent speeches. The reputation for invincibility came not only from weapons, but also from the mentality forged by daily life. The Spartan motto was to live simply, fight bravely, and above all, never back down from a challenge. Even Spartan women, amid a highly militarized society, were known for their strength, independence, and participation in public life, a rarity in the ancient world. They were the ones who inspired and demanded courage from their sons and husbands, for they knew that Sparta's fate depended on a generation prepared to defend the city at any cost. Behind the scenes of this fame involved a series of radical decisions. Sparta avoided contact with outside cultures, rejected luxury, and maintained its economy based on the labor of the helots, a class of servants subjected to extremely harsh conditions to support the warrior elite. This created a closed society, centered on its own values, where tradition was maintained almost as a sacred ritual. And even though in times of peace the city seemed austere and silent, the announcement of war was enough for the entire population to mobilize toward a single purpose, as if they were cohesive parts of a single body. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the true meaning of the Spartan myth goes beyond stories of heroic warriors or epic battles. It involves delving into the impact of these collective choices, the consequences of near absolute discipline, and the hidden truths that, while creating a legend, also paved the way for future transformations. Comment below. This makes sense to me, just so I know who is following every detail of this journey and connecting with the essence of Spartan history. But, like every story marked by glory and power, there comes a time when the legend begins to be tested by external forces and unexpected decisions. Sparta's supremacy seemed unshakable until an unlikely turn of events unfolded on the battlefields of Greece. In 371 BC, on the plain of Leuctra, the myth of Spartan invincibility met a worthy adversary, and at the same time, a silent transformation that would change the course of history forever. It was a time when alliances and rivalries shaped the fate of the Greek city-states, and in this context, Thebes, until then seen as a secondary force, dared to challenge Sparta head-on. The charismatic leadership of Epaminondas, a visionary strategist, brought not only courage to the Thebans, but also an innovative mindset. He realized that to face such a disciplined army, brute force or numbers alone were not enough. It was necessary to break patterns, surprise, and take risks no one else dared to consider. Behind the battle lines, there was a hidden truth, that the greatest changes happen when someone dares to think beyond common sense. On the field of Leuctra, the numbers were not in Thebes' favor. The Spartan army, led by King Cleombrotus I, had about 10,000 hoplites, heavy infantrymen, and 1,000 cavalry. In contrast, the Thebans had barely 6,000 hoplites and were 500 cavalry. Yet this apparent difference masked something deeper, the impact of a mindset open to innovation. Epaminondas rewrote the rules by concentrating his maximum strength on the left flank, creating a denser and more lethal formation known as the oblique phalanx. This allowed the Thebans to break the Spartan line at a critical point, while the remaining troops sustained the advance with discipline and courage. The outcome of the battle was a shock to all of Greece. When the Theban cavalry defeated the Spartan cavalry and forced them to retreat, the opening necessary for the decisive attack was opened. The flank led by Epaminondas advanced with almost inhuman intensity, breaking through the Spartan defenses and killing King Cleombrotus threatened himself in combat, an unprecedented tragedy, as it had been over a century since a Spartan king had fallen on the battlefield. The king's death profoundly destabilized the soldiers' morale, leading to a collapse of the defense lines and widespread flight. It is estimated that, while Thebes lost around 300 men, Sparta suffered 1,000 to 4,000 casualties, an irreversible blow to Spartan pride and confidence. This battle was not merely a military victory. It revealed the hidden depths of a greater transformation, demonstrating that even the most solid structures can crumble when confronted by innovative decisions and the courage to break with the past. The emotional impact of that day echoed throughout the Greek world. The myth of Spartan invincibility had been shattered, and with it, a new truth emerged. No power is immune to the twists and turns of fate, especially when it ignores signs of internal weariness or the boldness of its adversaries. Thebes, which until then had sought recognition, earned not only respect, but also the right to write a new page in history. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because beyond the bloodshed and military casualties, Sparta's defeat at Leuctra unleashed a series of consequences that would transform the mindset of an entire civilization, influence alliances, and pave the way for the next chapters in Greece's journey to power. Write it down. I'm on this journey too, just so I know who's connected to each twist and turn of this story. The shock of the defeat at Leuctra was felt throughout the Spartan establishment, but its true impact went beyond the numbers and losses on the battlefield. Sparta, which for centuries had been the pillar of stability and fear in the Greek world, suddenly saw its certainties shaken. The death of King Cleombrotus the Circe, the collapse of the supposedly perfect formation, and the mass flight of proud soldiers left deep scars, not only on the city walls, but on the collective spirit of the entire Spartan people. For the first time in generations, invincibility seemed but a distant memory. With the end of Spartan supremacy, a new reality took hold. Former allies dispersed, previously restrained rivals gained courage, and the legend of Sparta began to be openly questioned. It wasn't long before Thebes assumed the leading role and attempted to impose a new order, promoting tactical innovations, strategic alliances, and experiencing the taste of power. But the balance of power in Greece was never static. The cycle of rises and falls continued apace, transforming each victory into a future threat and each defeat into an invitation to reinvention. Sparta's decline was a slow process, marked by difficult decisions, internal and external pressures, and a hidden truth: its inability to adapt quickly to a changing world. The rigidity that had once been the source of its strength now became its greatest obstacle. While Thebes, Athens, and other city-states sought alternatives, promoted reforms, and risked new alliances, Sparta remained trapped in the past, trapped in its own legend. And it was in this scenario of fragmentation and search for new directions that an unexpected force began to emerge, silent and determined, far from the fields of Greece: Rome. At first glance, Rome seemed like just another rising city in the Mediterranean, but the difference lay in the collective mindset and institutional structure created by the Romans. They sought not just momentary victories, but the building of a lasting legacy. Every decision was considered long-term. Every conquest was incorporated into their structure, transforming past defeats into valuable lessons. The discipline of the Roman legions, their ability to absorb the best of rival cultures, and their intelligence to transform former enemies into loyal allies forged a new model of expansion. With the decline of Sparta, opportunities for Rome began to multiply. While the Greeks divided, quarreled, and lost energy in internal rivalries, Rome strengthened its commercial, diplomatic, and military position. The victory over Carthage in the Second Punic War consolidated its dominance in the Western Mediterranean, and from then on, nothing seemed capable of stopping the Roman march. It was the beginning of a profound transformation. The ancient Greek world, which had for so long defined the course of Mediterranean history, began to give way to a power with a different, pragmatic, and patient mindset. The most intriguing thing about this transition is realizing how Rome learned from the mistakes and successes of Sparta, Athens, Thebes, and so many other nations. They carefully observed the weaknesses of the Greek city-states, avoided making the same mistakes, and above all, never underestimated the importance of alliances, networks of influence, and quiet diplomacy. It was through this behind-the-scenes game, where every small decision could have gigantic consequences, that Rome built its empire. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Rome's rise wasn't just the result of military might or territorial conquests. It was built on a transformation of mindset, on the ability to see opportunities where others saw only threats, and on the courage to reinvent one's identity in the face of the challenges of the time. Comment below, understanding the transformation, just so I can feel who's following the impact of this shift on Sparta's destiny and Rome's journey. When Rome began its rise, it was no longer just another power seeking to expand its domains. Rome was becoming something entirely new, with a unique strategy based not only on military strength, but also on a deep understanding of the power of alliances and diplomacy. It was a force that did not impose itself brutally, but knew how to conquer, integrate, and shape. While the other Greek city-states were lost in their own internal disputes, Rome advanced, charting a strategic course that would transform the Mediterranean into its battlefield, where the Roman legions would be both the backbone of its strength and its primary tool of control and influence. Unlike ancient powers that dominated through sheer force, Rome understood that power lay not only in weapons, but in the ability to connect with those around it. The Greek city-states, fragmented and weakened by war, presented fertile ground for Rome, without the need for direct confrontation. The Romans were masters at building alliances, at being discreet, yet imposing partners, offering protection in exchange for submission, an approach that would soon begin to redefine the boundaries of power in the ancient world. Rome knew that while its military strength and disciplined legions were essential, building a network of allies was also crucial to its growing control. Over time, Rome managed to engage in Greek disputes with surprising political skill. Initially, Roman interest in Greece was economic, seeking trade routes and establishing diplomatic ties. However, as Rome's military power grew, the Romans began to play their cards more boldly. The weakened and divided Greek city-states were ready to align with Rome out of necessity, while others saw the growing Roman threat as an opportunity for stability. Rome adopted a strategy of intervening in local disputes, offering military aid to the Greeks when necessary, but over time, these alliances began to prove more advantageous to Rome than to the Greeks themselves. As the city-states found themselves increasingly strained by internal tensions and power struggles, Rome, with its strategic diplomacy, began to shape Greece's destiny in a way no other power could. Roman alliances, often disguised as support, began to transform into means of domination until Rome became the dominant force dictating the rules of the game in the Mediterranean. And the Roman rise was gradual but steady. Its trained and disciplined legions were able to quickly subdue any open resistance. At the same time, the Roman political structure allowed for a unique flexibility, which enabled the Roman Republic to integrate diverse peoples under its rule without constant revolt. Rome knew how to deal with cultural diversity, accommodating the newly conquered territories and maintaining a balance that favored its own expansion. Rome's strategic prowess was evident in its ability not only to conquer, but also to transform the peoples within its sphere of influence into allies, or at the very least, loyal vassals. Rome's ability to align both military force and diplomacy resulted in a vast empire whose tentacles extended throughout the Mediterranean region. Ultimately, Rome not only dominated Greece, but also managed to suppress the internal resistance that had fragmented the ancient Greek city-states, thus becoming the undisputed powerhouse of the region. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding how Rome went from a rising city-state to a global power requires a closer look at the Roman mindset, the decisions made, and how Rome used its diplomacy as a true weapon of power. These strategic, behind-the-scenes moves were undoubtedly Rome's greatest allies in its journey of conquest. Comment below, Rome knew what it was doing, so I know who else is following the impact of this historic transformation. And so, while Rome expanded its influence with almost surgical precision, Greek cities sought alternatives to avoid succumbing completely to the growing shadow of this new power. It was in this context of crisis, upheaval, and uncertainty that the Achaean League emerged as one of the last desperate attempts to preserve Greek autonomy in the face of Roman advance. The Achaean League was, in essence, a confederation of city-states attempting to reclaim the ancient spirit of Greek unity, but now weighed down by centuries of rivalry, fragmentation, and long-standing grievances. It was a movement motivated not only by the desire for freedom, but also by a hidden truth: the fear of losing not only independence, but also cultural identity itself, built on centuries of history, philosophy, and tradition. Over time, the League sought to gather forces, forge alliances, and even negotiate with former adversaries. The idea was simple, yet fraught with challenges: to unite Greeks under a single banner, resist foreign domination, and attempt to halt the transformation of the Mediterranean into a Roman mare nostrum. Behind these political decisions lay intense emotions, internal disputes, and unresolved resentments. But it was precisely in this mixture of pride and despair that the League found the strength to attempt, one last time, to redefine its destiny. Rome, on the other hand, watched these movements with the calm of someone who already knew the end of the story. Their mindset was one of confidence built on discipline, patience, and mastery of the inner workings of power. While the Achaean League sought to rekindle the flame of resistance, Rome had already prepared the ground, infiltrated its allies, and readied its legions for the final confrontation. The clash would not only be military but symbolic. It was the clash between a glorious past and a ruthless future. The final spark of this resistance occurred when the League, fearing the Roman advance and its growing influence over the internal decisions of Greek cities, decided to attack Sparta, which at that time was a Roman ally. It was a bold move, but also a hasty one. Rome did not hesitate. It responded with irresistible force, sending its army under the command of Consul Lucius Mummius with the clear objective of crushing any vestige of autonomy, and the response was devastating. As the legions advanced, the League's cities fell like dominoes. Corinth, a symbol of Greek resistance and pride, was reduced to ashes, its inhabitants massacred or enslaved, its memory all but erased in an act of absolute power. The dissolution of the Achaean League was not just the end of a political organization, but the true last gasp of Greek independence. Dreams of unity, reconstruction, and radical transformation all vanished before Rome's strength and its pragmatic mindset, which left no room for nostalgia. This episode is not just another battle among many. It portrays the moment when Greece had to face its own limitations, recognizing that the world had changed and that its glorious past was no longer enough to guarantee its future. Rome, with its silent strategies and ruthless decisions, taught Greece that survival requires constant adaptation and that sometimes even the most sacred traditions must give way to new realities. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the impact of this confrontation transcended borders and centuries, generating a transformation that still reverberates in the way we understand power, identity, and the true meaning of resistance. Comment: I'm on this journey too, so I know who is truly feeling this dive into the choices and consequences of the past. The destruction of Corinth was more than a simple military victory for Rome. It marked a symbolic end, the final page of a chapter already being written with the ink of decay and inevitability. In 146 BC, when the Roman legions under Lucius Mummius advanced on Corinth, they were not merely destroying a city, they were erasing the last vestige of organized resistance to Rome's total rise in the Mediterranean. The city of Corinth, once one of Greece's greatest commercial and cultural centers, was transformed into a field of ruins, its people massacred or taken as slaves, and its heritage, its memory almost completely erased. This episode was not just a military conquest, but a pure demonstration of power and control. Rome, with its infallible strategy, knew that conquering a city was not enough. It was necessary to completely destroy what it represented. Corinth was not just any city. It was a symbol of resistance, a bastion of independence that resisted the advance of Roman power. Its fall was not just the end of a city, but the end of a dream, the Greek dream, of independence, of a unified Greece which could no longer be recovered. But why was Rome so relentless in its destruction? The answer lies in the very nature of the empire. Rome wasn't just seeking territory or riches, but a profound transformation in the way civilizations around the Mediterranean behaved. With the fall of Corinth, Rome not only eliminated resistance, but also made clear the power of its domination. The message was clear: any attempt to resist, to maintain autonomy, would be crushed violently and mercilessly. Corinth was a city that, during its rise, had been a beacon of wealth, culture, and power. It had been the capital of the Corinthian League and had stood out for its strategic location between the Greek mainland and the islands of the Aegean Sea. It was renowned for its stunning architecture, magnificent temples, and the grandeur of its commerce. However, all this brilliance was not enough to withstand the unbeatable might of the Roman legions, who, driven by Rome's policy of expansion, were tasked with securing dominance over the last independent powers in the region, and it was with this purpose that the destruction of Corinth became the trigger for the collapse of the Greek dream. Lucius Mummius, the Roman commander responsible for the destruction, acted with coolness and precision. When he entered Corinth, the city was on the verge of political and military collapse, weakened by internal divisions and constant pressure from external forces. The Roman commander knew that to seal Rome's definitive victory, it would be necessary not only to defeat the defenders, but also to show all the peoples of the region that no city, no matter how proud or ancient, was immune to Roman power. The city was sacked, its magnificent buildings destroyed, and the remaining citizens were taken prisoner or sold into slavery. The fall of Corinth was not just the destruction of a city, but the erasure of an ideal, a mentality that had shaped Greece for centuries. Greek independence, with its fragile alliances and its vision of unity through culture and tradition, was replaced by the rigid Roman imperial structure, where absolute control and order were the rule. Rome not only conquered lands, but also destroyed the concept of autonomy, creating an empire where everyone, without exception, was subordinate to the central power. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the destruction of Corinth, while a landmark in Roman history, also carries within it a lesson about the limits of resistance in the face of the inevitable. It shows us how an empire can transform, and how a people, no matter how strong and glorious, can be defeated not only by military power, but also by the transformation of their own ideas and the adaptability of emerging powers. Comment: the empire is here to stay, so I know who's feeling this connection to the behind the scenes of this story. The destruction of Corinth, while symbolizing the end of an era for Greece, was not the end for all the cities that had long been the center of resistance against Roman rule. Sparta, in particular, received a different treatment. Unlike Corinth, which was eradicated from the face of history, Sparta was spared complete destruction, but in some ways this sparing ended up being more of a punishment than a blessing. The city, once the bastion of one of the most imposing military forces in the ancient world, saw its influence wither before the unstoppable might of Rome. Rome's sparing of Sparta from total destruction was a strategic decision that at first glance may seem surprising. Rome had already demonstrated its destructive power, especially after the fall of Corinth, and the idea of preserving a city like Sparta, which represented a historical rivalry, seemed unlikely. But contrary to what one might expect, Rome understood Sparta's symbolic value. Although no longer a military power, the Spartan city still carried an enormous symbolic weight. For Rome, completely destroying Sparta could mean destroying a vital part of Greek culture that, in some ways, could still be useful as a symbol of military power, a cultural heritage that the empire could eventually appropriate and adapt. This decision to spare Sparta had a profound yet paradoxical impact. Sparta was not destroyed like Corinth, but it was, in essence, stripped of its soul. The city, once the center of a powerful military machine and a symbol of discipline, now lived in the shadow of its former splendor. There were no longer Spartan warriors marching through the streets, nor the same energy that had once made the city feared throughout Greece. Sparta now became merely a memory, a relic of the past. Under Roman rule, the city lost its strategic importance and gradually became irrelevant. Rome, in turn, was able to consolidate its power and influence in a way Sparta could never have imagined. Although Sparta still maintained a certain autonomy, it was no longer a force to be reckoned with. The truth is that, having been spared destruction, Sparta was condemned to a gradual decline, becoming a symbol of a bygone era that still left its mark on Roman culture. Rome had allowed Sparta to exist, but the city was relegated to a status of near irrelevance, living under the weight of its own legend and history it could no longer revive. This paradox of being spared from destruction, yet condemned to oblivion, reflects the Roman mentality itself. Rome didn't care about physically destroying all its rivals. What mattered to the empire was ensuring that, through its own expansion, All enemies became part of Roman history, whether allies or vanquished. Sparta, by being spared, became a reminder of what Rome could have been, but now a shadow of its former glory. What remained of Sparta was the memory of battles, the stories of warriors, and the tradition of discipline that Rome, over time, absorbed and adapted. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because by looking at how Rome treated Sparta, we can understand a little more about the true impact of Roman rule. Rome not only conquered lands, but transformed entire cultures, absorbing what was useful and leaving behind what no longer served its purpose. And this transformation didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a long-term mindset, a strategic vision that wasn't limited to military conquest, but also the absorption and adaptation of the best of everything it conquered. Comment below, transformation is inevitable. So I know who else is following this journey and reflecting on the impact Rome had on Sparta and so many other civilizations throughout history. Sparta, for all its grandeur, did not suffer a sudden fall like many other cities of the ancient world. The city was gradually absorbed, as if engulfed by a silent but profound transformation. Its strength and legends did not disappear entirely, but they transformed into something very different from what they once were. The city of Sparta, which once defined war and power, eventually became a mere memory of the past, a legend that inspired but no longer intimidated. The legacy of Spartan discipline, military strength, and austere lifestyle was absorbed by victorious Rome, but without ever regaining its former independence and brilliance. Rome recognized the value of the cultures it conquered. Throughout its expansion, it absorbed the best of each city it dominated, and in doing so, built not only an empire but also a new mentality. When Rome conquered Sparta, it did not completely destroy its culture, as it did with Corinth. Rather, the Romans understood Sparta's symbolic value, the history it carried, and how it could be useful in maintaining the empire's morale and military identity. Spartan culture was not swept away, but molded to fit the new empire, transformed into a myth that served to inspire the Romans and extol the value of discipline and strength. What remained of Sparta was, in fact, a residue of its own glory, which gradually dissipated, but in a way that perpetuated its legend. Sparta became, in many ways, a symbol, an idea, more than an active city. Its ancient warriors, once feared throughout the Greek world, became a reference for Roman culture, which came to value and even imitate military discipline and dedication to the state, characteristics that had been cultivated in the Spartan city-state. Rome knew how to make use of this legend. The Roman Empire, though more flexible in its structure and more inclined toward diplomacy, adopted certain aspects of Spartan military education, which was reflected in the training of its legions. The image of the Spartan, with his absolute self-control and commitment to duty, became an ideal for many Romans who aspired to the same greatness. Even without the ancient Spartan warriors marching, the spirit of Sparta lived on, now immortalized in the stories and military practices of Rome. But this transformation did not come without a price. Sparta, though spared physical destruction, lost everything it had been. The city was no longer the leader in battles, nor the beacon of unwavering strength. Sparta became a reminder of what a civilization could be when it failed to adapt to the changing times. It lost its strategic role, and the lands once held by an unbeatable military force were now just part of a larger machine, where Rome dictated the rules. Sparta was absorbed not for its strength, but for the strength of the ideas it generated. Sparta's mentality, discipline, and value placed on military strength survived, but in a way that no longer reflected the original city. Rome, with its ability to absorb and adapt, transformed Spartan culture into something more suited to the new world it was creating. The legend of Sparta then became part of the cultural fabric of Rome, no longer a symbol of resistance, but an example to be followed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because while Rome transformed Spartan culture into legend, this transition leads us to reflect on what happens to great civilizations when they fail to evolve, when they become trapped in a glorious past but incapable of adapting. Sparta's legacy, then, is not only a lesson in strength, but also a lesson in the impact of the decisions of an empire that knew how to transform what it found into something new. Comment below. Transformation is the future, so I know who else is reflecting on this journey of adaptation and change. When we look at the history of Sparta and Rome, we see more than the rise and fall of empires. we see the struggle for the survival of ideas and culture. The true essence of an empire lies not only in its military prowess or the lands conquered, but in the legacy it leaves behind. In the case of Sparta, its unbeatable strength, rigid discipline, and revolutionary tactics became legends, but in the end, what remained was a memory shaped by victorious Rome. Sparta was not destroyed but transformed. It was absorbed into Roman culture, not as a trophy but as an example of what happens when even the greatest empires are forced to change or disappear. This story of transformation leads us to reflect on the nature of empires and civilizations. Rome not only defeated Sparta, but also appropriated its culture and ideas and adapted them to fit its own vision of power. Sparta, with its immutable mentality and rigidity, failed to adapt to changing times. And, as we have seen, an empire that fails to evolve ends up being swallowed by the weight of its own past. Now, if we place this story in a broader context, what we see is that the survival of any civilization ultimately depends on its ability to transform itself. Sparta, for all its glory, failed to take this step. Rome, on the contrary, knew how to transform its defeats into victories, its alliances into strength, and its adversaries into allies. This not only ensured its supremacy, but also allowed Rome to perpetuate itself for centuries. The lessons we can draw from this confrontation between Rome and Sparta go far beyond a simple territorial dispute. They speak to the importance of adapting to change, of always being aware of the forces shaping the future, and above all of not letting pride or tradition stifle the potential for transformation. The history of Rome is, in many ways, the story of a winning mentality, capable of learning from the mistakes of the past and using that knowledge to create an empire that would resonate for millennia. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this point, because what Rome truly understood was that true victory lies not only in physical strength, but in the strategic intelligence to win hearts and minds. While Sparta believed that supremacy came from rigid control, Rome understood that true control lay in the ability to create alliances and integrate cultures, absorbing the best of each, and thereby ensuring an empire that would be much more than the sum of its parts. This mindset of adaptation, transformation, and constant evolution is what separates empires that fall from those that endure. Comment below, the true legacy is transformation. So I know who else is reflecting on the importance of this mindset and how we can apply these lessons to our own lives and journeys. If you've made it this far, it's because this content resonated with you, and that makes me very happy. I'm truly grateful to be sharing this journey, and I'd love to hear what resonated most with you in this story. If this video inspired you in any way, comment below. This message was for me, so I know who's with me until the end of this reflection. Oh, and if you enjoyed the content, a like helps keep this space growing, so more people have access to stories like this full of lessons and revelations from the past. Your interaction is what makes all this even more powerful, and if you want to continue this journey of discovery, there's a video right here that complements this topic. Click there and stay with me there as we continue exploring the impact of Rome and other decisive moments in history. See you soon, and see you in the next video.